My name is Mr. Somerville, and I am going to be your teacher for today. Now, there are certain stories you trust, and there are certain stories that cannot be trusted. Back in my day, there was this story that went around my friend's school for a long time about a young man who stole sodium from the chemistry lab and flushed it down the toilet. Apparently, it caused this massive explosion. I remember thinking at the time, if I'm going to believe this story, I'm going to need a few things. Firstly, I want to hear directly from someone who was there. And failing that, I'm going to need at least 5 other stories from people in that school, and if their stories match up, then I might be prepared to believe it. Generally speaking though, if you hear a really crazy and suspicious story through a friend's friend, chances are you'll be slow to believe it. But if you overhear a few of your friends talking about you, you're gonna believe that. You trust the source, and since they don't know that you're listening, it means they're probably telling the truth. The same is true for the people who wrote the accounts of Jesus' life. Now hear me out. These writers would have never thought that their accounts would be overheard by millions, or that 2,000 years later, that their accounts would still be read and become part of the best-selling book of all time. They were just writing them down for their friends and for local communities who wanted to know more. And these short books are known as the Gospels, which just means good news, and they're written by 4 people: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There's a common question about these books, and in fact the Bible. Is what we read in our Bible today the exact same as what it would have been 2,000 years ago, and can it be trusted? Because there's a common critique of Christianity that the source writings of Jesus were altered due to whatever agenda the early Christians may have had. So can we trust them? Well, historians look for a number of things when deciding if an ancient piece of writing is reliable or not. They'll ask questions like, how soon was it written after the actual events? How many copies of the history do we have, and are they accurate? And are there records from eyewitness testimonies? Take Alexander the Great, one of the most famous conquerors of the ancient world. He was born 300 years before Jesus. However, the only surviving accounts were written at least 300 years after his death. 2 were written by historians Arrian and Plutarch, who obviously did not know Alexander or anyone from that century. But despite the time gap, we generally accept their histories as the most reliable sources on him, because none of the original accounts, written while he lived, have survived. We've all heard of the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar, born July 100 BC. But the interesting thing is that in the 1,000 years after his death, we know of only 20 copies of the account of his life. Despite the tiny amount of information we have available to us, we take these accounts as history. And to be clear, I'm not saying that these accounts shouldn't be taken seriously. And here's the interesting thing. Based on historical accuracy, there's more reason to believe the accounts of Jesus than that of Alexander the Great or Caesar. The original documents were written down just after Jesus' life, some within just 30 years, and there were still eyewitnesses around who could confirm the details. And when it comes to relying on the accuracy of copying, we have more than 5,000 ancient manuscripts that contain part or all of the New Testament, and that's just in Greek. We have over 8,000 copies in Latin, and then 9,000 in many other languages. And it was all done within 300 years of Jesus' death. Compare that to the mere 20 copies we have of Caesar's history after 1,000 years. So when it comes to historical record, I think Jesus is in a league of his own. His story went viral, and it happened within a generation. Not bad for the child of an unwed refugee peasant living in an obscure corner of the world's greatest empire. So if we accept that the accounts of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar are historical, reliable sources, should we not then be willing to accept the historical accounts of Jesus?